At our Christmas party, my son-in-law seated me on a folding chair beside the kitchen door. Then he raised his glass and mocked me in front of 40 guests. How does it feel to be completely useless? I looked at him calmly. Pretty good, actually. How does it feel knowing you're about to be homeless? His smile vanished. My daughter froze, dropped her fork, and stared at me. Homeless Dad, what are you talking about? I truly appreciate you being here on Dad's Revenge Stories. Where in the world are you watching from? Leave your city or country below. A quick note. This narrative contains fictional adaptations for storytelling and moral insights. Any similarities to specific names or settings are unintentional, but the lesson holds power. The Christmas lights were already up when I pulled into the driveway. Every window blazing gold and red cars packed bumper to bumper all the way down the block. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, before cutting the engine, looking at the house the way you look at something you built with your own hands, and then handed to someone who never once said thank you. I am Walter Hayes. I am 68 years old, and I have spent the better part of this past year learning the difference between a man who keeps quiet because he is at peace and a man who keeps quiet because he has been counting. I was done counting. Inside the party was already loud. Derek had strung lights along every rafter, set up a bar cart near the fireplace, and arranged the furniture the way people arrange things when they want a room to feel like a stage. Maybe 40 people filled the space: his co-workers, his golf buddies, a handful of relatives from Emily's side, and a few faces I had never seen before in my life. Christmas music pushed out of a speaker on the kitchen counter, something bright and frictionless, the kind of music designed to keep people from thinking too hard. Derek spotted me the moment I stepped through the front door. He crossed the room with that particular walk of his shoulders, back, chin up, the walk of a man who has already decided he has won something. Walter. He grabbed my hand and pumped it twice. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I said. He steered me through the crowd, with one hand at my shoulder, guiding me the way you guide someone who doesn't know where they're going. We passed the main table, a long oak table set with good china and cloth napkins, every chair already spoken for. He kept walking. Past the sideboard, past the kitchen doorway, to a spot near the back wall where a folding chair had been placed, at an angle close enough to the kitchen door that I could feel the heat from the oven every time someone pushed it open. More room to move around back here, Derek said, already turning away. You know how it gets when the whole family's together. I set my jacket over the back of the folding chair and sat down. I want to be clear about something. The folding chair did not hurt my feelings. I have sat on worse. What the folding chair told me was something I had suspected for a long time, that in Derek's accounting of this family, I was a line item, not a member. You seat the people who matter at the table. Everyone else gets whatever's left. Lily found me first. She was 9 years old, and she moved through crowded rooms, the way small children do, navigating by instinct, appearing suddenly at my elbow with a plate of Christmas cookies and both her front teeth still gone. Grandpa. She climbed halfway onto my knee. I saved you the one with the green frosting. Noah said green ones taste the same, but he's wrong. They're better. Noah has always been wrong about frosting, I said, and she laughed so hard she nearly dropped the plate. Noah found me a few minutes later hanging back at the edge of the kitchen doorway, 14 years old, and already practicing the art of standing in rooms without quite committing to them. He caught my eye and nodded a small, serious nod older than his age. I nodded back. Emily I saw from across the room. She was standing near the fireplace with two women I recognized from her office, her hair done up. Wearing the blue dress she saved for occasions that mattered. She glanced my way once, and for just a moment, something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, but its first cousin. Then one of the women said something, and Emily turned back, and the moment was gone. Derek worked the room the way he always did. Joke here, backslap there, refilling glasses before they were empty. I watched him the way I used to watch suppliers who quoted me prices before I had seen the invoice. Everything on the surface was cheerful. It was what was underneath the surface that required attention. Toward the end of the meal, Derek tapped his glass with a spoon and stood at the head of the table. The room settled into the kind of quiet that forms when people sense an announcement coming. "I just want to take a minute," Derek said, "to thank everyone for being here. This house has been good to us." He spread his hands wide, a gesture that took in every wall, every window, every square foot of the space. "We've put a lot into it, and I think you can see it's paid off. Next year we've got some exciting plans to take things even further, but we'll get to that in a little while." He looked down at the table, and then his eyes found me across the room. His chin lifted slightly, his mouth curved. But first, he raised his glass in my direction. "I want to acknowledge our guest of honor over there in the corner. Dad." The word came out with a small, soft laugh attached to it, the kind of laugh that dresses itself up as affection, but is neither. "How does it feel to be completely useless?" A few people chuckled, assuming it was the kind of joke families make. Emily's fork stopped moving. Noah's head came up fast. I set my own glass down on the folding tray beside my chair. I have been asked a great many questions in 68 years. I have been asked questions in warehouses and courtrooms and hospital waiting rooms and the particular silence of 3 a.m. kitchens. I have learned that the best answer to a question designed to diminish you is one that is perfectly, precisely true. I looked at Derek across that room full of people, across the good china and the Christmas lights and the 6 years of everything I knew, and he thought I didn't. And I said in a voice that did not shake and did not rush, "Pretty good, actually. Why don't you tell me how it feels to be homeless right after I take my house back?" The laughter stopped, as if someone had pulled a plug. Derek's smile did not fall. It froze, suspended on his face for a full 2 seconds past its expiration, the way a flame looks for one last moment before the oxygen runs out. Then it was gone, and what was underneath it was something I had not seen on him before. Not anger, not embarrassment. Calculation. Emily's water glass hit the table with a sharp crack as she set it down too hard. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a breath. "Dad, what house? What are you talking about?" My hand moved to the inside pocket of my jacket where the envelope had been sitting against my ribs all evening, warm from my body heat. "Sit down, Emily," I said. "There are some things you need to hear. But before I tell you about that envelope, I need to take you somewhere else. 7 years back. A hospital corridor in the middle of the night. The kind of corridor where the fluorescent lights hum just a little too loud, and the coffee from the machine at the end of the hall has been burning since noon. And nobody has bothered to make a fresh pot, because everybody in that hallway has bigger things on their minds than coffee. I am not a man who cries easily. I want to be upfront about that. 40 years running a building materials warehouse will do that to you. You learn early that the floor doesn't care about your feelings, and neither does the inventory. You solve the problem in front of you, you close out the day you go home. That was the gospel I lived by for a long time. Margaret cured me of it slowly over 41 years. She was the one who taught me that a house full of the right people was worth more than any balance sheet I could ever put together. She said it on our wedding night, and she said it on our 35th anniversary, sitting on the porch of the place we'd built in Glendale, Ohio, watching the neighbor's dog chase a squirrel it was never going to catch. "Walter," she said, "you are the best counter I have ever known. Just make sure you're counting the right things." I thought about that a lot in the winter of 2018. The doctors told us November, and November they were right about. I sat in that corridor for 6 hours after she was gone, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I even sat down. A nurse came by twice and asked if I needed anything. I said no both times. There was nothing in that building that was going to help me, and we both knew it. What I remember most about driving home that night was how many lights were still on in other people's houses. All those windows, glowing yellow and warm, all those families inside doing ordinary things, watching television, washing dishes, arguing about nothing, not knowing yet that ordinary was the whole point. I drove past every single one of them and felt the distance between me and all of it like a physical weight behind my sternum. Our house in Glendale had 4 bedrooms. Emily had grown up in 2 of them, bouncing between her own room and the one we kept as a guest room for her friends. Margaret had kept a sewing room on the 2nd floor that smelled like cedar and lavender, and I had a study on the 1st floor that smelled like old paper and the particular brand of pipe tobacco I gave up in 1998 but never quite stopped missing. 4 bedrooms is a lot of house for one person. Emily called the next morning, her voice thick and careful, the way voices get when someone has been crying and is trying not to let you hear it. "Dad, how are you doing?" "I'm upright," I said. "That's about as far as I've gotten." She made a sound that was half laugh, half something that hurt to hear. "That counts. That absolutely counts." Derek called an hour later. His voice was measured appropriate, the right tone for a man calling his father-in-law the morning after a loss. He said they were there for me, whatever I needed. Just say the word. I thanked him. He said it again slightly differently, and then again a 3rd time, which I noticed, but did not examine too closely at the time. 2 months later, I sat across from a real estate agent named Carol Briggs and listed the Glendale house. In America, when you sell a house that's been paid off, the proceeds come to you at closing in what's called a net settlement. After the agent's commission and any outstanding fees, you walk out with a check or a wire transfer for the balance. The Glendale house had been paid off since 2009. After Carol's commission and the closing costs, I walked out with $342,000. I did not buy another house for myself. I want to explain why, because it matters. Emily and Derek had been renting an apartment in Millbrook, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor with a parking spot that flooded every spring. They had Noah, who was 8 then, and Emily was pregnant with Lily, and the apartment lease was ending in March. Derek had been talking about buying always a plan just around the corner, but the corner kept moving. Emily never complained. She was not a complainer. But I had heard something in her voice over the past year, a particular quality of tiredness that had nothing to do with the pregnancy, and I recognized it from the years when Margaret and I were young and stretched thin and trying to hold everything together with our bare hands. I did not want my daughter to feel that way if I could help it. "I want to buy you a house," I told Emily over the phone in January 2019. She started to protest immediately. I could hear her pulling breath to argue, and I said, "Margaret would have wanted this. Don't fight me on it." That was the only argument I had that she couldn't answer. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, Dad, okay." I paid $340,000 for a 4-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Ridge Drive, the kind of house with a proper yard and a garage, and enough space that Noah could have a room of his own, and the new baby could have a nursery, and there would still be a guest room with my name on it. Under American property law, the deed was recorded in my name as the sole owner. I was the legal owner of that house, which meant I was responsible for the property taxes, the insurance, and any decisions made about the property itself. That was not a detail I expected to matter. It mattered enormously. The day I handed Emily the keys, she cried so hard her shoulders shook. She pressed her face against my chest, the way she used to when she was small and something had frightened her, and I held on and did not say anything because there was nothing that needed to be said. Derek shook my hand on the front porch, firm and deliberate, and looked me straight in the eye. "We'll take good care of it, Walter," he said. "I promise you that." I believed him. That is the part I have gone back to most often in the years since. Not the money, not the deed, not any of what came after. Just that handshake, and how entirely I believed the man giving it to me. Before Emily had finished measuring the first window, Derek asked me to stay a moment. He had something he wanted to say, something he called delicate. And in 4 minutes on that driveway in the cold January light, he found the exact lever that would cost me everything. The driveway conversation lasted maybe 4 minutes. I have turned it over in my mind so many times since then that I could draw you a map of every crack in the concrete, every brown patch in the grass along the edge, the way the afternoon light came in at that particular January angle and made everything look colder than it already was. Derek had glanced toward the front door first, making sure Emily was inside, making sure the coast was clear. That detail did not register with me at the time. It registers now. "Walter." His voice dropped to just below the level the neighbors could catch. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm asking because I care about Emily, not because of anything else." "I'm listening," I said. "She's proud." He said it the way you'd say the sky is blue, like it was a fact about the universe, not an argument he was building toward. "You know how she gets. If she finds out you paid for all of this, the whole 340, it's going to eat at her. Every single day she walks through that door, she's going to feel like she owes you something she can never pay back. And for Emily, that feeling..." He shook his head jaw tight, performing a particular kind of sorrow. "That's worse than any apartment. That's worse than the flooding parking spot and the busted radiator and all of it put together." I looked at the house. The front windows were lit up, and I could see Emily moving past them, touching walls, running her hand along the doorframe of the room that would be the nursery. My daughter measuring a life she didn't yet know I had bought her. "I'm not saying lie to her," Derek said quickly. "I'm just saying let her settle in. Let her feel like this is something the two of us built together. Give her that dignity." He paused. "She deserves that, doesn't she?" And there it was. He had found the exact lever. Emily's dignity. Margaret's voice in my head saying, "Count the right things," and me miscounting so badly, I didn't even feel it happen. "We keep it between us for now," I said. "But Derek, I want her to know eventually. This isn't permanent." "Of course." He reached out and gripped my forearm firm and warm. "Of course, Walter. Just give her time to get settled. You're a good father. You know that." I drove home with the heater running and the radio off. The one-bedroom apartment I had rented on the east side of Millbrook was on the second floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and other people's cooking. I had a bed, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet I had brought from the Glendale study. That was more or less the whole inventory. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote out a figure on the back of an envelope. $340,000. Below it I wrote what I had left in savings after the purchase, roughly $41,000. Below that I wrote what my pension paid out each month. Then I wrote down what I estimated the property taxes on a house like that would run annually, the homeowner's insurance, the maintenance reserves you needed to keep set aside if you owned a 40-year-old colonial. The numbers were manageable. Tight, but manageable. I had spent 40 years keeping warehouses in the black on margins that would make a banker weep. I could manage tight. What I did not write down, because I had no way of knowing to write it down, was a single line that would have changed everything: the cost of trusting a man because he married your daughter. That spring I called Emily every Sunday. She sounded happier than she had in 2 years, lighter, almost the way people sound when a weight they've been carrying gets shifted. She talked about paint colors and the yard and where she was going to plant tomatoes come May. She talked about Noah starting at the new school and how he had already made a friend on the block. She talked about the nursery and the second-hand rocking chair she had found at an estate sale in Bexley. She never once mentioned Derek telling her anything about the house. I told myself that was because he was handling it carefully the way we had agreed. I told myself she would find out when the time was right, and when she did, she would understand why we had waited. I told myself a lot of things that year. The first call from Derek came in August, 7 months after the keys changed hands. I remember because I was watching a baseball game with the volume low and the apartment windows open trying to catch whatever passed for a breeze in an Ohio August. Walter. His voice had that careful quality again, the same register he had used in the driveway. I hate to bring this up. I know you've already done so much. But we've got a situation with the roof. My stomach did something small and unpleasant. What kind of situation? The flashing around the chimney. He exhaled, heavy with regret. The inspector we had out here says it's been going for a while, probably before we moved in. If we don't address it before the fall rains, we're looking at interior water damage. Drywall insulation, the works. How much? I said. The estimate came in at $4,200. I know the timing is terrible. I know you're not. He stopped. I just didn't know who else to call Walter. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. I thought about Emily and the nursery and the rocking chair from the estate sale. I thought about a newborn in a house with a leaking roof. I pulled up my banking app and looked at the balance for a moment. Send me your account number, I said. I'll wire it tomorrow morning. Derek let out a breath that sounded like pure relief. Thank you, Walter. Honestly, I'll pay you back as soon as I can get things reorganized on our end. He never mentioned paying it back again. And I, God help me, never asked. After the roof, there was the furnace. November 2019, 3 months after the chimney flashing. Derek called on a Tuesday evening, and I knew from the first syllable, that same careful apologetic register, that something was going to cost me money before the conversation ended. The furnace went out last night, he said. Completely dead. The repair guy says it's too far gone to fix, we need a full replacement. Walter, it got down to 42 degrees in the house last night. Lily was crying. Emily had her wrapped in every blanket we own. My chest tightened the way it does when you hear a grandchild's name attached to cold weather and crying. That was the calculation Derek made, I understand now. He did not lead with the number. He led with Lily. How much? I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. 3,800. I've already called 3 companies. That's the lowest quote. I pulled up my banking app the same way I had in August. The number in my savings account was smaller than I wanted it to be. Send me the quote in writing, I said. I'll wire it by Thursday. You're a lifesaver, Walter. I mean that. I'll get you paid back on this one, I swear. He swore on the furnace the same way he had sworn on the roof. By the time spring came around again, I had stopped writing those promises down, because writing them down required believing them. The pipe in the upstairs bathroom went in March 2020. $2,100. Derek said the previous owners had used inferior materials, which may even have been true for all I know. I paid it. The property taxes came due in June of that same year. Derek texted me a photograph of the bill with a line of explanation underneath. The county had reassessed the whole neighborhood, following new commercial development on the western edge, and our rate had gone up significantly. $6,400. I looked at the photograph for a long time before I responded. Is there anything we can do to appeal it? I typed back. Already tried. I talked to the county office last week. They said the assessment stands. I paid it. What I was paying for in addition to the taxes themselves was my own reluctance to ask questions. In Ohio, property tax bills are mailed directly to the owner of record. My name was on that deed. That bill should have come to me. What I did not know until much later was that Derek had filed a change of address request with the county assessor's office shortly after they moved in. A routine-looking form, easy to submit, easy to overlook. The bills went to Sycamore Ridge Drive. He received them, reported whatever number he chose, and I paid without verifying. I had never thought to ask why Derek was the one receiving it. That was my failure. But the redirection of that mail was his. I thought about that a great deal during the winter of 2020, sitting at my kitchen table with the heat turned down to 64 because my utility bill had started to feel like a luxury. By the end of 2020, I had transferred just over $31,000 to Derek's account since the August roof call. I kept a log in a spiral notebook, dates, amounts, stated reasons. The notebook lived in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, underneath the folder I kept Margaret's medical records in. That's where I put the things I wasn't ready to look at directly. My car that winter was a 2009 Chevrolet Impala with 160,000 miles on it and a heat shield under the engine that rattled on cold mornings until the engine warmed up. I had been meaning to replace it since before Margaret died. Every time I set money aside toward a newer vehicle, something at Sycamore Ridge Drive needed attention first. Emily called on Sundays, same as always. She sounded well busy with the kids, satisfied with the house, talking about Noah's basketball and Lily starting preschool. She mentioned Derek occasionally, usually in the context of work he had taken on a new territory for his company. He was traveling more than before. He was stressed about his numbers. She did not mention the repairs. I assumed Derek was handling those conversations separately, keeping the mechanics of the house away from her, the way he had kept me away from her. I did not yet understand that keeping people away from each other was Derek's primary skill. The call I remember most from that period came on a Sunday in March 2021. Emily's voice was different, tighter, like a string tuned too high. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always," I said. Derek mentioned. She stopped, started over. "He said you've been having some financial trouble, that you've been asking him for help." My hand tightened around the phone. I felt something move through my chest that I can only describe as a cold current. Not surprise exactly, but the particular chill of a thing you suspected becoming a thing you know. "Did he?" I said. "He said he didn't want to worry me, that he'd been helping you out quietly, and that you'd been, his word was embarrassed, that you didn't want me to know." Her voice dropped. "Dad, why didn't you just call me? I would have—" "Emily." I kept my voice steady. I had 40 years of practice keeping my voice steady when my insides were doing something else entirely. "I am not having financial trouble. I have not asked Derek for money. Not once." A pause stretched between us, long enough to hold a great deal. "But he said—" "I know what he said." I took a breath. "Emily, I want you to hear me very clearly. I have never borrowed money from your husband. Do you understand me?" Her voice, when it came back, was careful in a way that told me she was working something out. Then why would he say that? I had an answer to that question. I was not ready to give it yet. "I don't know," I said. "But I'd like you to think about it." She changed the subject after that, and I let her, because some realizations need to come to a person in their own time, in their own order. You cannot hand someone a conclusion they are not ready to hold. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Outside my apartment window, a cardinal had landed on the bare branch of the maple tree in the parking lot, as red as a warning, as bright as something that refused to be missed. I already knew the question I needed to answer. What else has he told her? The question I had written in my notebook, what else has he told her, sat there for 6 months before anything answered it. Not from Derek. Not from Emily. From a man named Frank Miller in the hardware store on Clement Avenue on a Saturday afternoon in October 2021, while I was looking for weather stripping for my apartment door. Frank lived 2 houses down from Sycamore Ridge Drive. He was 65, retired from the postal service, the kind of man who knew every neighbor's car by sound and kept a running commentary on the neighborhood the way other people kept diaries. I had met him the first spring after Emily and Derek moved in when I stopped by to help with the back fence. Frank had leaned over his own fence that afternoon and introduced himself with a can of iced tea and an opinion about the city's pothole repair schedule that I had not asked for and did not need, but found oddly comforting. We had run into each other maybe a dozen times since then, always pleasant, always brief. I heard him before I saw him in the hardware store. That same carrying voice explaining to a store clerk why the caulk gun on the second shelf was inferior to the one on the third. "Frank," I said. He turned around and his whole face opened up. "Walter Hayes. How long has it been?" He grabbed my hand and shook it the way men of his generation shake hands, full grip, 2 pumps eye contact. "You look thin. You eating?" "I eat fine," I said. "You look exactly the same." "I look terrible and I know it." He waved that off. "How are the kids? How's the house holding up?" "That's a beautiful piece of property, I'll tell you. Derek's done well with it." Something in my chest went very still. "What do you mean, done well with it?" Frank tilted his head. "The rental unit. Up above the garage. Nice young couple moved out last month, actually. I saw the U-Haul, but they were quiet, good neighbors." He paused, reading something in my expression that made him slow down. "You knew about that, right? The rental." My throat had gone dry. "Remind me when that started," I said, keeping my voice at hardware store normal, the kind of voice that does not betray a single thing happening underneath it. Frank scratched the back of his neck. "Oh, gosh. Over a year ago now, maybe 14, 15 months back. I remember because it was right around when my granddaughter started walking, and that was, 14 months. Derek mentioned it in passing one morning, said he was bringing in a little extra income. Smart move with the market, what it is." Frank's eyes narrowed just slightly. "He didn't loop you in." "Derek handles the day-to-day," I said. "I'm not always in the loop on the small stuff." Frank nodded, accepting that. "Well, like I said, they were good tenants. Quiet, kept to themselves. I think he's already got someone new lined up for next month, actually. I saw him showing the space last Tuesday." He picked up the caulk gun he had been defending and turned it over in his hands. "Beautiful space, too. He redid the flooring up there, put in a proper bathroom. Must have cost a few dollars." "Must have," I said. We talked for another 3 minutes about nothing, his granddaughter, the pothole on Jefferson that had finally been repaired, whether the hardware store's hours were changing for winter. I do not remember a word of it. I was standing in that aisle, but I was somewhere else entirely doing arithmetic on a calculator I could not put down. 14 months. At whatever rate a room above a garage rented for in that neighborhood, and I knew the neighborhood well enough to estimate because I had bought a house there. Derek had been collecting somewhere between $1,000 and $1,200 a month. 14 months. A minimum of $14,000 out of a property that still had my name on the deed going into an account that was not mine, while I wired money for furnaces and pipe repairs and property tax increases and God only knew what else. I shook Frank's hand again at the end of the aisle. Good to see you, Frank. Give my best to your family. You too, Walter. Tell Emily I said hello. I walked to my car in the parking lot and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. My hands were not shaking. I was past the age where anger made my hands shake. Now it settled somewhere deeper behind the ribs, a cold and quiet weight. I thought about Derek on the phone with me, voice careful and apologetic, telling me the furnace had failed, and Lily had been wrapped in every blanket they owned. I thought about him using my granddaughter's name. My granddaughter's cold as the lever to get $4,000 out of me. I thought about him walking a new tenant up the stairs above the garage the following Tuesday, showing off the flooring he had renovated, with whose money I did not yet know. But I had a feeling I was going to find out, and not enjoy it. I pulled out my spiral notebook from the glove compartment. I had started keeping it in the car sometime that spring, without quite deciding to, and I wrote October 2021, rental unit above garage. Approx 14 months. Frank Miller. Estimate $14,000 minimum, not reported, not shared. Then I turned to the page where I kept the running total of what I had transferred to Derek since August 2019. I added a new line at the bottom, but this time I did not add to the total. I subtracted, because there was a question I had been asking wrong for 2.5 years. I had been asking how much I had given. The right question was how much had been taken. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. I drove past the turn that would have taken me home and kept going almost without deciding to, until I found myself turning onto Sycamore Ridge Drive. I drove the length of it slowly, the way you drive a street, when you are looking at something carefully, rather than passing through it. The house sat at the far end of the curve, exactly as it had always looked. Well-maintained, well-lit gutters clean the yard, still carrying the last of the October color. A house that looked from the outside exactly like what it was supposed to be. In the driveway, parked at an angle that suggested it had been there a while, was a brand new pickup truck. Dealer plates still on it. Chrome running boards catching the afternoon light. I drove home with the number still running in my head. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in my apartment with the window cracked and the October cold coming in off the parking lot, running numbers in my head, the way I used to run inventory counts on the night before a quarterly audit. A man who spends 4 decades in a warehouse learns that the numbers are almost never the problem. The problem is always the story someone built around them. Derek had built a very good story. I had believed it for 2.5 years. Now I was starting to read the inventory myself. In the morning I made coffee and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. I looked up the truck. The model I had seen in the driveway, I had noted the make and trim level. The way I used to note equipment specs was a current year full-size pickup crew cab, the kind with the chrome package and the running boards. Base price for that configuration, $41,000. With the trim level, I had observed closer to 46. In the United States, when you finance a vehicle through a dealership, the standard down payment runs between 10 and 20% of the purchase price. That puts the down payment for that truck somewhere between $4,100 and $9,200. I opened my spiral notebook and turned to the entry from August 2019. The roof repair. $4,200. Wired on a Thursday morning at Derek's request, because the chimney flashing was failing and the fall rains were coming and he did not know who else to call. I looked from the notebook to the laptop and back again. The timing was not proof. I understood that. A man who spent 40 years reading inventory reports knew the difference between a coincidence and a pattern. And he also knew that you needed more than one data point before you called something a pattern. But the number sat in my chest, like a stone that had found its correct weight. I called Emily that Sunday, same as always. Her voice was warm, a little tired, the good kind of tired that comes from a full week. "Dad, how are you doing?" You sound like you didn't sleep. I'm fine, I said. How are the kids? Noah's got a history project due Wednesday, and he's left it to the last possible second naturally. Lily lost another tooth. She's convinced the tooth fairy is going to bring her enough for a new art set. What does an art set run these days? $12 apparently. The tooth fairy is going to need a small loan. I laughed, and it was genuine, and for a moment I just let it be, that my daughter and her children on a Sunday morning, the ordinary texture of a life I loved. Then I said carefully, Emily, how's the house? Everything running okay? A beat. Yeah, totally fine. Why? No reason, just checking. The furnace holding up this winter. As far as I know. Another small pause. Derek handles all that stuff. I honestly wouldn't know if something was wrong until it stopped working. Not that's fair, I said. Hey, Derek. Get a new truck recently. I thought I saw something in the driveway when I drove past last week. The pause this time was a half-second longer. Yeah, he got it a couple months ago. Company incentive program, he said. Something about hitting his sales numbers for the quarter. Her voice had the slight flatness it got when she was repeating something she had not examined closely. I don't know all the details. You know how he is about work stuff. Sure, I said. That's great. Tell him congratulations. I ended the call and sat with the phone in my hand. Company incentive program. A $46,000 truck as a sales incentive. I had worked adjacent to sales teams for 4 decades, and I had seen a great many incentive programs. They ran to gift cards, airline miles, the occasional weekend trip. They did not generally run to crew cab pickups with chrome running boards. I called the county assessor's office on Monday morning and asked a simple question: had there been a neighborhood-wide reassessment on the west side of Millbrook in the tax year 2020? The woman on the phone checked. There had been a reassessment in 2019, she said, with bills reflecting the new rates going out in early 2020. And would the increase have been significant? I asked. For most residential properties in that corridor, the increase was between 3 and 7%, she said. Standard adjustment. 3 to 7% on a property valued at what the assessor would have had on file for Sycamore Ridge Drive. I did the math in my head before she finished the sentence. The actual tax increase would have been somewhere between $200 and $400 above the prior year. Derek had asked me for $6,400. I thanked the woman and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving, looking at my notebook at the columns I had kept for 2.5 years. I was not angry, yet not the hot kind. What I felt was the cold, focused clarity of a man who has finally found the discrepancy in the ledger and knows exactly what he has to do next. That Saturday, I drove to Sycamore Ridge Drive. I had called Emily the day before and told her I had some old tools in the truck she might want, which was true enough to say out loud and convenient enough to serve a purpose. She said, "Come for lunch," and I said I would. Derek's new truck was gone when I pulled up, which was exactly what I had hoped for. Emily met me at the door in an old sweatshirt, Lily attached to her hip. Noah visible over her shoulder at the kitchen counter, doing something to a bowl of cereal that was taking significant concentration. Dad. Emily hugged me with her free arm. She smelled like coffee and the particular soap she had used since college. You look like you could use a meal. I look like a man who drove 20 minutes, I said. Same thing. Lily squirmed down and grabbed both my hands. Grandpa, come see what I made with the clay kit. I am coming to see what you made with the clay kit, I said. But first I want to take a quick look at the furnace. Make sure it's ready for winter. Emily waved toward the basement door. Knock yourself out. I'll make sandwiches. I went downstairs alone. The furnace was original to the house. The manufacturer's label on the side gave the installation year. It had not been replaced. The heat exchanger showed no recent work, no new components, no service stickers from any contractor dated later than 2017, 2 years before we had even bought the house. I stood in that basement for a full minute, one hand on the furnace, casing the temperature of the metal, telling me everything the receipts had not. Then I went upstairs, ate the sandwich Emily made, listened to Lily explain every detail of the clay penguin she had constructed, and did not say a word about what I had found downstairs. Some things you need to be absolutely certain of before you say them out loud. I was most of the way there. After the sandwiches, Emily took Lily upstairs for a nap, and Noah disappeared back to his history project, with the focused misery of a 14-year-old facing a self-inflicted deadline. That left me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold, and 20 minutes that belonged to no one in particular. I used them. The basement had already told me what I needed to know about the furnace. But I had paid for other things besides the furnace, and I was not leaving this house until I had looked at all of them. I went out through the back door into the yard, pulling my jacket closed against the October cold. The yard was well kept. Emily had always had her mother's instinct for gardens, and even in late fall, the beds along the back fence held the dried architecture of what had been a good summer. I stood at the far edge of the patio and looked up at the roof. In 2019, Derek had told me the flashing around the chimney was failing. Flashing is the metal sheeting, usually aluminum or galvanized steel, that seals the joint between a chimney and the surrounding roofline. When it fails, water gets under the shingles and into the decking below. A repair involves pulling back the shingles, replacing the flashing material, resealing the joint, and relaying the disturbed shingles. A contractor who does this work leaves a mark slightly newer shingles in the repair zone, fresh sealant visible at the chimney base. Sometimes a small color differential where new material meets old. I looked at that chimney for a long time. The shingles around it were uniform in color and texture, weathered evenly the way shingles weather when nothing has touched them in years. The sealant at the base was cracked and faded, the kind of slow deterioration that takes a decade, not the fresh bead of material a contractor leaves behind. Nobody had touched that chimney since before we bought the house. I went back inside through the basement, checked the water lines in the utility room. In March 2020, Derek had told me a pipe in the upstairs bathroom had burst inferior materials from the previous owners. He said $2,100 to repair. I looked at the main supply line, the branch lines running up through the floor joists. Everything was original copper green with age, no sections of newer PEX or CPVC pipes spliced in, no compression fittings indicating a repair. A burst pipe leaves evidence even after it is fixed. There was no evidence here. I stood in that utility room with my hand on a cold copper pipe and felt something settle in my chest. Not grief, not rage, something more like the sensation of a long illness finally being named. There is a particular relief in knowing even when what you know is terrible. I had been sick with not knowing for a long time. I went upstairs to wash my hands in the bathroom off the hallway. Lily was awake before her nap had properly taken hold. I could hear her singing something to herself in her room, the private, tuneless singing of a child who does not know anyone can hear. I knocked on her doorframe. "Hey, Bug!" She looked up from the floor where she had arranged approximately 40 small stuffed animals in what appeared to be a formal procession. "Grandpa, you have to be quiet, they're processing." "Processing where?" "To the mountain." She pointed at a pillow at the far end of the rug. It's a very important journey." "I'll keep my voice down," I promised. I sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb the procession. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, but don't be loud about it." "Do you remember the music box, the one that was in the den, the wooden one that plays the song?" Lily looked up from her animals with an expression of total authority. Grandma's music box, with the dancer on top? That's the one. Do you know where it is? I haven't seen it in a while. Her face shifted into something more complicated. It was on the shelf by the window. But it's not there anymore. I looked for it. She picked up a small rabbit and repositioned it in the procession with great care. I asked Daddy where it went, and he said Mommy put it in storage because she was cleaning up. But I asked Mommy, and Mommy said she didn't put it anywhere. My throat closed around whatever I had been about to say next. When did it go missing? Do you remember? I kept my voice level the way I kept it level in the furnace room, the way I kept it level on the phone with Frank. Lily thought hard, squeezing the rabbit. Before school started. So summer. She looked up at me and her eyes held that particular clarity that children have before they learn to soften things for the people they love. Grandpa, is something wrong with the music box? No, sweetheart, I said. I just wanted to make sure it was safe. She studied me for another moment, 9 years old, and already able to read the gap between what an adult says and what an adult means. Then she turned back to her procession. It should be safe, she said firmly. It was Grandma's. I went downstairs with both hands on the railing because my legs felt less reliable than usual. Emily was in the kitchen refilling her coffee, and she turned when she heard me on the stairs. Everything okay? You look pale. Just cold from being outside, I said. Emily, the music box, Margaret's music box, the one from the den. Do you know where it is? Emily's brow pulled together. It should be on the shelf. I haven't moved it. She set her mug down and walked toward the den doorway, and I followed. She stood in front of the bookshelf where the music box had lived for 4 years, where I had set it myself the day we carried Margaret's things over from storage. The shelf held books, a framed photo of Noah at his first baseball game, a small succulent in a terracotta pot. No music box. Emily turned to me, and the confusion on her face was completely genuine. The particular look of a person encountering evidence that the world does not match the map they were given. I haven't touched it, Dad. I would never. Her voice climbed slightly on the last word, catching because she understood as well as I did what that music box was and who it had belonged to. Derek must have moved it. Maybe he put it in the attic when he was reorganizing last spring. I'll ask him tonight. That's fine, I said. Don't make a fuss over it. But something in my face told her not to drop it, because she reached out and put her hand on my arm. Dad, we would never get rid of it. You know that. I know, I said. I hugged her at the door, held Noah's shoulder for a moment, let Lily press a small clay penguin into my coat pocket to keep. I drove home through the afternoon traffic with Margaret's music box missing from a shelf where it had no reason to be missing, and Derek's name sitting at the center of every explanation I could construct. I drove past 3 consignment shops on the way home. I did not stop. Not yet. I went back on a Tuesday. I told myself I was running errands on that side of town, which was true in the way that a lot of things I told myself that month were true. Meaning true enough to say out loud, but not the whole story. The whole story was that I had not slept properly since Saturday, and the music box had been sitting at the center of every quiet moment since then, the way a missing tooth sits at the center of your tongue. The first consignment shop I tried was on Redfield Avenue, the kind of place with mismatched furniture crowding the sidewalk and a hand-lettered sign in the window. The woman at the register had not seen anything matching my description. The second shop on the corner of Clement and 9th was closed on Tuesdays. I sat in the car outside it for a moment, hands on the wheel, telling myself this was a reasonable errand, and not a man following a dread he was not yet ready to name. The third shop was called Miller's Consignment and Resale. It occupied the ground floor of a narrow building 3 blocks from the elementary school. Lily attended the kind of shop where the bell above the door is genuinely old, and the smell inside is genuinely pleasant. Cedar, old paper, the particular warmth of things that have been owned before. I described the music box to the man behind the counter. Wooden, dark walnut finish, approximately 8 inches wide. Brass fittings, a small dancer on the mechanism that turned when the lid was opened. The song it played was a Brahms lullaby, though I did not mention that, because I did not trust my voice on that detail. The man 50's reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, thought for a moment, then came around the counter and led me to the back wall of the shop. And there it was, on the second shelf from the top, between a brass desk lamp and a stack of Reader's Digest condensed books from the 1980s. My hand was shaking when I reached for it. I did not try to make it stop. I turned it over. The small mark I had made on the bottom with a wood-burning tool in 1994, a small H inside a circle. Margaret's idea, she said someday we would want to know which things were ours, was still there. "This came in recently?" I asked, and I was proud of how steady my voice was. "End of September," the man said. "Gentleman brought in a carload of things. Furniture, some kitchenware, few pieces like this." He pulled out a receipt book. "Paid him out about $240 for the lot. This piece alone I priced at $65. He looked at me over his reading glasses. "You know it?" "It belonged to my wife," I said. "She passed away 3 years ago." He was quiet for a moment, in the way decent people go quiet when they understand they have stumbled into something. "I'm sorry," he said. "You want it back?" "Yes," I said. "I'll pay whatever you're asking." He looked at me, then at the music box, then back at me. $65. He said, "But I'll take 40. I paid him the 65. I carried the music box to my car and sat in the driver's seat and set it on my lap and opened the lid. The mechanism turned, and the Brahms lullaby began, that clean, small, perfect sound, the sound I had heard 10,000 times across 41 years of marriage, the sound Margaret hummed when she was distracted, the sound that had played in our kitchen and our living room and our bedroom and in the hospital room at the end while she slept. I pressed my hand flat over the opening to muffle it, because I was in a parking lot in broad daylight, and I was 68 years old, and I had reached the limit of what I could hold with dignity. I sat there for a long time. Then I put the car in drive and went home. That evening, Noah called me. He called from his cell phone, which he rarely did. Usually I called him, and usually he answered with one syllable. That he dialed first told me something. His voice, when I picked up, had that particular quality teenage boys' voices get when they are trying to sound casual and not quite managing it. "Hey, Grandpa, what are you doing?" "Reading," I said. "What are you doing?" "Nothing, just..." He exhaled. "Mom said you were asking about the music box when you were here Saturday." "I was." "Did you find it?" I looked at the music box sitting on my kitchen table lid, closed, the small dancer frozen in mid-turn. "I did, yes." A pause where I could hear him deciding something. "Where was it?" "A consignment shop. Not far from your school." Another pause longer. When Noah spoke again, the casual register was gone, and what was underneath it was something raw and young and trying very hard to be fair. "Dad brought a lot of stuff to a place like that, back in the summer." I didn't know what he was taking exactly, but I saw him loading boxes into the truck early one morning before Mom was up. When I asked him what was in them, he said it was just junk from the attic. Old stuff nobody wanted. My chest hurt. Not in the medical sense, in the older sense, the one that has no clean name. "Noah," I said. You didn't do anything wrong. I know. His voice was tight. I should have looked. I should have asked more. You were 13, I said. That's not your job. I'm 14 now. That's not your job either. I waited a beat. Noah, can I ask you something? Yeah, the gifts. The presents I've sent you and Lily over the years, the bike, the basketball set, the art supplies. How did your dad describe where those came from? A silence that was not empty but full. The way silences are when someone is working up to a truth they are not sure they should tell. Then, he said he bought them. Most of the time. Noah's voice dropped lower. One time I told Lily that you got her the bike because I remembered you dropping it off. I was there. And Dad said I was remembering it wrong. He said I was confusing it with something else. A pause. But I wasn't Grandpa. I was right there in the driveway. You put the bow on it yourself, and the bow was crooked because you said you'd never been good at bows. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my hand against them hard. The bow was crooked, I confirmed. My voice came out rough, not quite level. You have a good memory, son. Yeah. He made a sound that was half laugh, half something that cracked in the middle. Grandpa, is something going on, like really going on, because it feels like... He stopped, started over. It feels like things don't add up, and nobody will say so out loud. I looked at the music box on my table, at the small dancer frozen mid-turn, at the H inside a circle on the bottom that Margaret had insisted we mark it with, because someday you'll want to know which things are yours. You're right that things don't add up, I said. And I'm going to fix that. But I need a little more time. Can you trust me for a little while longer? Yes, he said without hesitating. Obviously, yes. Good man. I cleared my throat. Go finish your homework. It's already done. Then go do something that's not homework. He laughed, a real one, brief and genuine. Okay, Grandpa. Hey, I'm glad you found the music box. Me too, son, I said. Me too. I set my phone down and opened the music box lid and let the Brahms lullaby play all the way through every note in my quiet apartment, while the night came down outside and I sat with my wife's voice in the music and the weight of what I was going to have to do next settling around me like the start of a long, necessary winter. Derek texted me on a Wednesday morning, 10 days after I brought the music box home. The message was friendly casual, the kind of text that works hard to seem like it costs nothing. He said he had some paperwork he wanted to run by me, nothing urgent, just some updates to the kitchen. He had been thinking about stuff that would need my sign-off since my name was on the deed. He suggested coffee. He named the place himself, a shop called Cornerstone on Garfield Avenue, the kind of establishment with exposed brick and oat milk options and background music pitched at a frequency designed to make you feel relaxed and slightly off balance at the same time. He suggested Saturday morning. He used the word routine 3 times in 4 sentences. When a man uses the word routine, that many times what he is telling you is that something is not. I said yes. I put my phone down and opened my notebook and wrote the date, the location, and one word underneath paperwork. Saturday came cold and overcast, the kind of November morning that reminds you winter is not a metaphor. Derek was already there when I arrived, which was unusual. Derek was constitutionally late. The kind of man who treated punctuality as optional and other people's time as elastic. He had already ordered for both of us. My coffee was on the table, black the way I take it. That small detail that he had remembered that he had used it told me he had prepared for this conversation the way you prepare for a negotiation, not a family discussion. Walter. He stood briefly, gripped my hand. Thanks for coming out. I know it's a hike. 20 minutes, I said. I've driven further for worse coffee. He laughed, and it was a good laugh. Warm practiced the laugh of a man who understood that laughter was a tool. Fair enough. He settled back into his chair and pushed a manila envelope across the table. So, I wanted to walk you through this in person because I think it's easier to explain face to face. I picked up the envelope and opened it the way I had opened supplier contracts for 40 years, methodically, without hurry, reading each page before moving to the next. Derek talked while I read, filling the air with context and framing the way salespeople fill air when they want you to absorb their narrative before you form your own. The kitchen's been showing its age, he said. Emily's been wanting to update it for a while. New layout, better appliances, open it up to the dining area. And while we're doing that, I figured we could look at the whole footprint, maximize the space, maybe reconfigure a couple of rooms upstairs. I turned to the second page. Architectural drawings, floor plans. I had read enough building documents in my warehouse years to understand what I was looking at, and what I was looking at was not a kitchen renovation. The drawings showed the house subdivided. The main floor retained as primary living space, but the upper level and the garage apartment reconfigured into two separate rentable units, each with its own entrance, each with a kitchenette, each with a bathroom. The kind of configuration that in current American zoning language is called a short-term rental property, what most people know as an Airbnb model, where the owner lists the space on a platform and collects nightly or weekly fees from travelers and visitors. Under federal and Ohio state law, converting a single-family residence into a short-term rental operation requires zoning approval from the municipality, a business license compliance with local health and safety codes, and critically the consent of the property owner of record. That last part was why my name was on the signature line at the bottom of page 4. I turned to page 4. My name was already printed there, neat and official, waiting for a signature I had not yet agreed to give. On page 3 in the section labeled Investment Partners, I found a name I had not seen before: Gary Solis. Below his name, a percentage. 40% equity stake in the projected revenue stream. Who is Gary Solis? I said. Derek did not miss a beat. Business associate, great guy. He's done 3 of these conversions in Columbus, knows the market inside out. He's bringing operational expertise, managing the listings, the bookings, the turnovers. We bring the property. We, I said. You and me. The property. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, the posture of a man making an offer. Walter, the numbers on these are genuinely strong. A property like ours in that neighborhood conservatively pulls $8,000 to $12,000 a month in rental income. After Solis takes his cut after operating expenses, we're looking at $5,000 to $7,000 clear. Split between us. He spread his hands. That's real money. That's your retirement, supplemented Emily, comfortable, the kids taken care of. I looked at him across the table. I thought about Frank Miller in the hardware store telling me about the rental unit above the garage, 14 months of income that had gone into Derek's account, while I paid the maintenance bills on the property generating it. I thought about the music box in the consignment shop. I thought about a water pipe that had never burst, and a furnace that had never been replaced. How much would the renovation cost? I said. And, we're estimating $180,000 to $200,000 for the full conversion. Solis is bringing $60,000. That leaves the balance split between the property contribution, he gestured vaguely toward me, and a construction loan I'd service. $120,000. Minimum. On a property that still had my name on the deed, being converted into a business venture, in which I held no equity percentage whatsoever. The signature line on page 4 would authorize the renovation and the zoning application. It would not give me a single percentage point of Gary Solis's 40. I need to read this properly, I said. All of it, at home. Something moved across Derek's face, not quite frustration, but its first cousin controlled quickly and replaced with understanding. Of course. Take all the time you need. He picked up his coffee cup. I just want you to know, Walter, this is a real opportunity. The kind that doesn't wait around forever. Most things worth having don't, I said. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. I did not open it again that evening. I already knew what was in it. What I needed was not more information. What I needed was a plan. I opened my filing cabinet instead, the bottom drawer, the one with Margaret's medical records, and my spiral notebook, and the folder where I kept the original deed to the house on Sycamore Ridge Drive. I pulled out the deed and laid it flat on the kitchen table. My name, my signature, my house. I picked up the phone and looked up the number for a real estate attorney. The attorney's name was Patricia Okafor, and she had an office on the 4th floor of a building on Commerce Street that smelled like carpet cleaner, and the particular seriousness of people who spent their days untangling other people's mistakes. Her assistant had fit me in for a Tuesday morning appointment, and I showed up 7 minutes early with my spiral notebook, the original deed, and a manila folder containing every document I had accumulated since August 2019 bank transfer confirmations. Derek's text messages printed on 8.5 by 11 Frank Miller's account of the rental unit written out in my own hand, and dated and signed a photograph I had taken of the furnace label showing the original installation year, and 3 photographs of the chimney taken from the backyard with the date stamp visible in the corner. Patricia Okafor was 52 years old, brisk without being unkind, and had the quality I most value in any professional. She listened completely before she spoke. I laid everything out in front of her in the order it had happened, and she read each document without interrupting me. And when I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and looked at me steadily. "Your name is on the deed," she said. "Sole owner of record." "Correct," I said. "No co-ownership agreement, no trust arrangement, no transfer of interest of any kind since the original purchase." "Nothing?" "And the individual currently residing there, your son-in-law, has been subletting a portion of the property without your knowledge or consent, collecting rental income from a unit on your property and representing himself to third parties as the owner." "That is my understanding, yes." She tapped the photograph of the furnace. "These repair requests, you have the transfer confirmations, but no receipts from contractors, no permits pulled, no inspection records." "I have looked for contractor permits through the county building department," I said. "There are no permits on file for this address since 2016, 3 years before we purchased the property. In Ohio, any structural repair, HVAC replacement, or plumbing work above a certain cost threshold requires a permit pulled with the county building department. No permit meant either the work was done illegally, without proper authorization, or more likely, the work was never done at all." Patricia wrote something on her legal pad. "As the owner of record," she said, "you have the right to terminate the occupancy arrangement at any time provided you give proper notice under Ohio landlord-tenant law. For an occupant who has no written lease, and I am assuming there is no written lease, there is not. Stium. For an occupant without a written lease who has been in residence for more than 1 year, Ohio requires a minimum of 30 days written notice to vacate delivered in person or by certified mail." She looked up. "You can give that notice at any time. Today, if you choose." "I don't want to act until I'm ready to follow through completely," I said. "And I have some things I want to do first." She nodded. "Understandable. What about your daughter and grandchildren? I want them protected. I'm not asking anyone to leave except Derek." "That's your right as the property owner. You can specify in the notice that it applies to one named occupant only." She set down her pen. Mr. Hayes, I want to ask you something directly. Is there a reason you haven't spoken to your daughter about any of this yet? I thought about that for a moment. I wanted to be certain, I said. Before I said anything that couldn't be unsaid. When you tell someone their husband has been lying to them for 6 years, you do not get to take it back if you're wrong. Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. You're not wrong, she said. Your documents are thorough. She closed the folder. Get the notice ready when you're prepared to use it. And Mr. Hayes. She paused. I am sorry this happened. So am I said. Thank you for your time. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table and opened my filing cabinet all the way down to the bottom drawer. I pulled out the spiral notebook and turned to the page where I had been keeping the running total. 2.5 years of entries, dates, and amounts, and Derek's stated reasons in one column, my observations in the other. I added the numbers slowly, the way I had always done math that mattered by hand. No calculator, so there was no machine to blame if I got it wrong. The furnace that had never been replaced, $3,800. The pipe that had never burst, $2,100. The roof flashing that had never been touched, $4,200. The property tax overage, the difference between what Derek had charged me and what the actual increase had been, just over $6,000. Other miscellaneous requests over 2 years, the smaller ones I had not examined as closely, $11,400. And over all of it, the rental income Derek had collected from my property and not shared 14 months per Frank Miller's signed account, at a conservative estimate of $1,100 per month, based on comparable units in that neighborhood, a minimum of $15,400 unverified, but documentable through a subpoena of Derek's bank records, if it came to that. I added the column twice to be sure. Then I wrote the total at the bottom and underlined it. $87,900. I sat with that number for a long time. Outside my apartment window, December had arrived overnight. The sky, the particular flat white of a Midwest winter that has decided to be serious about itself. The parking lot below dusted with the first thin snow of the season. Margaret had loved the first snow. She said it was the year wiping the slate clean, getting ready to try again. She said it every December without fail, the same words, and every December I told her that was very poetic, and she told me I had no soul, and I told her I had plenty of soul. I just kept it in a filing cabinet, and she laughed. I looked at the bottom of the page. $87,900. Then I turned to a fresh page and began to write. Not numbers this time. A list of what I was going to do in order and when. I had spent 40 years running a warehouse. I understood logistics. I understood that a plan executed without a preparation was not a plan, it was a wish. And I was done making wishes about Derek Carter. I wrote the list all the way to the end. Then I closed the notebook, put it back in the bottom drawer, and picked up the phone to call Emily. Not to tell her, not yet, just to hear her voice. Just to remind myself exactly what I was doing this for. She picked up on the second ring. Dad, how are you? I'm good, I said, and for the first time in months, part of me almost meant it. How are the kids? Patricia Okafor's office sent me the draft notice on a Thursday afternoon, attached to an email with a subject line that read simply, Hayes Review and Confirm. I printed it at the library on 5th Street because my apartment printer had been out of ink since September, and I had not gotten around to replacing it, which tells you something about the year I had been having. I sat in the library's quiet room with the printed pages and read them twice slowly, the way I read anything that was going to have my signature on it. The document was 4 paragraphs. It identified me as Walter James Hayes, owner of record of the property at Sycamore Ridge Drive. It identified Derek Allen Carter as a non-lease occupant of the property. It stated that his occupancy arrangement was hereby terminated effective 30 days from the date of delivery, as permitted under Ohio Revised Code Section 5321.17, which governs the termination of month-to-month tenancies and informal occupancy arrangements. It specified that the notice applied solely to Derek Allen Carter and did not affect the residential status of Emily Carter or the minor children, Noah Carter and Lily Carter, who were welcome to remain at the property at the owner's discretion. 4 paragraphs. 30 years of damage in 4 paragraphs. I signed it that afternoon at the library desk with a pen borrowed from the reference librarian and mailed it to Patricia's office by certified mail so she could hold it until I was ready to deliver. I was not ready yet. I needed one more thing first. I needed to tell Emily. Not everything. Not the full accounting, not the spiral notebook, not the $87,900 laid out line by line. There was a version of this story that Emily needed to hear from me before she heard it from Derek's spin from a room full of relatives from whatever narrative he would construct the moment he understood the walls were closing. She deserved that much. She deserved to hear her father's voice saying, "I love you, and I am sorry this took so long, and I am going to fix it," before the world got loud around her. I called her on a Sunday, same as always. The kids were at a birthday party. She said some classmate of Lily's, a princess theme. There had been a great deal of glitter involved, and she was still finding it on the dog. "Emily," I said, "I need to talk to you about something. Not on the phone. Can I come over Tuesday?" A pause. Not a worried pause, more like the pause of a person recalibrating, shifting from ordinary Sunday afternoon to something with more weight in it. "Of course. Is everything okay, Dad?" "Everything is going to be okay," I said. "That's what I want to talk to you about." Tuesday came with freezing rain that turned the roads into suggestions. I drove carefully, the Impala's tires finding their grip on the wet asphalt, the defroster running full blast against the fogged windshield. I had rehearsed what I was going to say so many times in the preceding 48 hours that the words had started to feel worn smooth like river stones. Emily met me at the door in her work clothes. She had taken a half day, and she took one look at my face and said, "Come in and sit down and let me get you coffee before you say anything." That was her mother in her. Margaret had always believed that bad news was marginally more survivable with something warm in your hands. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Lily had explained the clay penguin procession to me 6 weeks earlier. Emily wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me steadily, the way she had learned to look at things that required courage. "Tell me," she said. "I need you to listen all the way through before you respond," I said. "Can you do that?" "Yes, the house," I said. "Sycamore Ridge Drive. I bought it, Emily, not Derek. Me. $340,000 from the sale of the Glendale house paid at closing in January 2019. My name is on the deed. It has always been on the deed." Her face did not collapse. It did something more controlled and more painful. It went very still, the way a person's face goes still when they are absorbing something that requires a complete restructuring of what they believed was real. "Derek asked me to keep it from you," I said. "He said you were proud, that you would feel ashamed. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. That was my mistake, and I own it. Dad, let me finish," I said gently. "Please." She pressed her lips together and knotted her knuckles white around the mug. Over the past 2.5 years, Derek has contacted me repeatedly with requests for money. Roof repairs, a furnace replacement, burst pipes, property taxes. I have paid all of it. I have transferred $87,900 to his account. I paused to let that settle. I have since verified that the majority of those repairs were never performed. The furnace is original to the house. The roof has not been touched. The tax increase he reported to me was a fraction of what he charged. Emily made a sound, not a word, just a sound low and involuntary, the sound of something giving way under pressure. He has also been subletting the apartment above the garage without my knowledge, I said. For at least 14 months. The rental income went to him. Stop. Her voice cracked on the word. Just give me a second. I gave her the second. I gave her 2. I watched her press the back of one hand against her mouth hard, and I watched her eyes fill, and then with a visible and wrenching effort, she pulled herself back. How long have you known? She asked, and her voice was steadier than I would have been in her position. I've been piecing it together since October, I said. I wanted to be certain before I said anything. The music box. She looked up at me sharply. That's why you asked about the music box. Yes. Her breath came out in a long, shaking exhale. Where is it? On my kitchen table, I said. It's safe. She pressed both hands flat on the table in front of her fingers, spread the way people press their hands on solid surfaces when they need the world to hold still for a moment. What are you going to do? I've already prepared a notice, I said. 30 days certified mail, his name only. You and the children are not affected. You can stay as long as you need. I am not putting you out, Emily. That is not what this is. Her eyes were wet, but her voice had found its footing. What do you need from me? Nothing right now, I said. I need you to know. That's all. I need you to know before anyone else makes sure you hear it differently. She reached across the table and took my hand in both of hers, and her grip was so tight it almost hurt, and I was glad for every bit of it. Okay, Dad, she said. Okay. Derek received the notice on a Friday. I know this because Patricia Okafor's office sent it by certified mail with return receipt, requested a standard procedure that generates a green card, signed by the recipient mailed back to the sender as proof of delivery. Patricia called me that Friday afternoon to confirm the card had come back with Derek's signature. His handwriting, she said. Delivered at 10:47 in the morning. I spent the rest of that Friday waiting for my phone to ring. Derek was not a man who absorbed bad news quietly. He was a man who responded to threat by escalating, by calling in favors, by working rooms, by constructing narratives that made him the reasonable party and everyone else the problem. I expected to hear from him before sundown. He did not call Friday. He did not call Saturday. Sunday morning, my phone buzzed with a text, not a call, a text, which told me he had decided on a particular strategy. The message read, Walter, I think there may have been a misunderstanding about some paperwork that came through this week. I'd love to sit down and clear the air before the holidays. Also, we're having the family Christmas party on the 21st. Everyone's coming. Would mean a lot to have you there. Emily and the kids have been looking forward to it. Let me know. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time slowly, the way you read something when you want to be absolutely sure you are not imagining what it is doing. It was elegant in its way. The notice became a misunderstanding about paperwork. The solution was a conversation on his terms, in his space with his timeline, and threaded through the whole thing weightless as a fishing line were Emily and the kids. They're looking forward to it. Come and be family. Come and let this be something we can still resolve over eggnog and Christmas music and 40 people who don't know what they're walking into. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and thought about that for a long time. Then I typed back, I'll be there. Thanks for the invitation. Emily called me that afternoon, and I could hear the particular quality in her voice that meant she was somewhere Derek could not overhear. She had stepped outside. I thought there was wind in the background, the soft crunch of her boots on the front walk. He didn't say anything to me about the notice, she said, keeping her voice low and controlled. He came home Friday like nothing happened. Made dinner, helped Noah with homework. Saturday he took Lily to her art class. He's been She stopped. He's been perfect, Dad. That's what's making me sick to my stomach. That's how he operates, I said. He's buying time, figuring out his next move. He texted you about the party. He did. Are you going? Yes, I said, a beat. Why? Because if I don't, he controls the story. He tells 40 people that Walter got confused about some paperwork and had to be calmed down, and by New Year's the whole family believes it. I kept my voice even. If I'm there, the story gets told once in front of everyone, and it gets told correctly. Emily's breath came out unsteady. Dad, I don't know if I can sit there and pretend for an entire evening. You won't have to pretend for long, I said. Just long enough. And then what? Then the truth, I said. It's been the truth the whole time. It just hasn't had the right room yet. She was quiet for a moment, not the absence of words, but the presence of something being decided. Then, okay, I trust you. Her voice dropped even lower. Dad, I found something. In his desk when he was out Saturday. A folder with Gary Solis's name on it. There are emails about the house, about the conversion plan. And there's one from Solis to Derek that says, she stopped, steadied herself. It says, does Emily know the property isn't actually yours? And Derek wrote back, she knows what she needs to know. My grip on the phone tightened until I felt it in my knuckles. Emily, listen to me. Don't touch that folder again. Don't let him know you've seen it. I already photographed everything, she said. I closed my eyes for a moment. 40 years in a warehouse, and she was her father's daughter after all. Good girl, I said. Forward them to Patricia Okafor's email. I'll give you the address. Already done, Emily said. And despite everything, despite $87,000 and a music box in a consignment shop, and 6 years of a story that had been built around my silence, I felt something loosen in my chest. Something that had been wound so tight for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like before. Emily, I said. I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago. Stop. Her voice was firm. You did what you thought was right. He used that. That's on him, not you. A pause. Just bring the documents, Dad. The deed, everything. Bring it all. It's already in an envelope, I said. It's been in an envelope for 2 weeks. After I hung up, I went to the hall closet and took down my good dress shirt from the hanger, the one Margaret had bought me for our last anniversary dinner, the one I had not worn since. I shook it out, checked the collar, hung it on the bedroom doorknob where I would see it in the morning. December 21st was 5 days away. I ironed the shirt on a Tuesday evening with the radio on low, and I thought about the first time I had handed Derek the keys to a house that belonged to me, and taken his handshake as a promise. I thought about how much a handshake was worth, and how much it was not, and how long it had taken me to learn the difference. 5 days. I put the iron away, folded the shirt over the back of the chair, and went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in months. I had done everything I could do in advance. The rest was going to happen in that house in front of those people, and there was nothing left to prepare. I slept better than I had in 2 years. The 21st came in cold and clear, the kind of December night where the stars are sharp and the ground is frozen solid, and every sound carries further than it should. I arrived at 7:15 minutes after the start time Derek had printed on the invitation. Not late enough to be rude, late enough to walk into a room that was already running at full speed, where the social machinery was already engaged and people were already 3 conversations deep, and nobody was standing at the door waiting to intercept me. The driveway was packed. I counted 11 cars before I gave up counting and parked 2 houses down in front of Frank Miller's place. Frank's windows were lit up, his own quiet evening visible through the curtains. I sat in the Impala for a moment and checked the inside pocket of my jacket. The envelope was there, thick and solid against my ribs, the same place I had been keeping it for 2 weeks. My good shirt was pressed. My shoes were clean. I got out of the car and walked toward the house that still had my name on the deed. Inside the party was exactly what Derek had designed it to be. Generous, warm, impossible to argue with on the surface. Christmas lights on every rafter. A bar cart near the fireplace with good bourbon and decent wine. The dining table extended to its full length and set with cloth napkins, the good china that Emily had inherited from Margaret's sister, candles lit down the center. Music coming from somewhere, something instrumental and festive pitched to keep people happy and talking. 40 people easy. Derek's co-workers, 2 couples I recognized from the neighborhood, relatives from Emily's side, a scattering of faces I had never seen. Gary Solis was near the fireplace, a thick man in his mid-40s with the particular ease of someone who spent a lot of time in rooms where deals were made. He had a drink in one hand and was laughing at something Derek had said, and the 2 of them stood together the way people stand when they have already divided up the future between themselves. Derek saw me the moment I stepped through the door. His face opened into a smile that arrived a half-second too fast, the smile of a man who has been watching for someone and does not want to show it. "Walter?" He crossed the room, hand extended. "Glad you made it. Road's okay?" "Fine," I said, shaking his hand. "Nice party. We do our best." He put one hand briefly at my shoulder and steered me through the room, past the main table, past the sideboard where the appetizers were laid out, through the kitchen doorway, and slightly past it to the back wall where a folding chair had been placed, at an angle that put it outside the main flow of the room. A small tray table beside it held a glass of water and a paper cocktail napkin. "Ain't more room to move around back here?" Derek said, already half turned away. "You know how it gets when everyone's together." I took off my jacket, draped it over the back of the folding chair, and sat down. The envelope pressed against the inside pocket, patient as a held breath. Lily found me within 3 minutes, appearing at my elbow with a plate of Christmas cookies and the particular urgency of a 9-year-old who has information that cannot wait. "Grandpa Noah said the ones with the red sprinkles are just sugar cookies, but I think they have cinnamon, and I need a second opinion." I tried one. "Cinnamon," I confirmed. "Noah is wrong." She pumped her fist and disappeared back into the party. Noah caught my eye from across the room. He was standing near the kitchen counter, a can of soda in his hand, watching the room the way 14-year-olds watch rooms when they understand that something is happening that the adults have not explained. He lifted his chin at me. I nodded back. Emily was near the fireplace, talking to a woman from her office. She wore the blue dress, her hair pinned up, and she looked composed in the way that people look composed when they are working very hard to hold something together. She caught my eye once, just for a moment, and what passed between us was not something I could name, too many things at once, too much compressed into the space of a glance. Then she turned back to her conversation, and I turned back to watching Derek. He worked the room with the confidence of a man who had already decided how the evening ended. He refilled glasses without being asked. He laughed at the right moments. He touched Emily's arm as he passed her, a small proprietary gesture, and she did not pull away, and I watched that and filed it. Midway through the main course, Derek tapped his glass with a spoon. The room settled. Before dessert, he said, standing at the head of the table, "I want to share something I've been working on. Some of you know I've been exploring ways to invest in this property, really maximize what we have here." He spread his hands wide, a gesture that claimed every wall, every window, every room. "I've got a business partner, Gary." He nodded toward Solus near the fireplace. "And we've put together a plan that I think is going to be really exciting for this family." He paused, letting the room lean in. Then his eyes found me in the corner in the folding chair beside the kitchen door. "We just need one final signature from the property owner," he said, and he smiled, "to get things moving." 40 people turned to look at me. Derek raised his glass slightly in my direction, a toast or a dare or both at once. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and rested my hand on the envelope. "Not yet, but soon." Before I tell you what was in that envelope and what I said to the man who called me useless in my own house, drop the word house in the comments, so I know you are still here. This is Dad's Revenge Stories. Stay with me. Some details ahead are fictional, crafted for reflection. Step away now or see what 68 years of patience finally looks like. The room was still looking at me when Derek picked up his wine glass and walked around the table in my direction. He moved slowly, deliberately, the walk of a man who had calculated the distance between himself and his destination and found it satisfying. The party noise had dropped by half. Conversations, trailing off forks, set down the particular attentiveness of people who sense that something unscripted is about to happen and do not want to miss it. He stopped 3 feet from my folding chair, close enough that I could see the flush of wine along his jaw, the brightness in his eyes that came from 3 glasses of confidence and 6 years of getting away with things. He raised his glass toward me the way you raise a glass at a roast, warm, theatrical, performing generosity for the room. So Dad." His voice carried easily, effortlessly, the voice of a man who had spent 2 decades in sales and knew exactly how to fill a room. "How does it feel to be completely useless?" A few people laughed. The reflexive laugh of guests who assume a son-in-law joking with his father-in-law is harmless family theater. Someone near the bar cart chuckled into their drink. Emily's fork stopped moving. Noah sat up straight in his chair, and the look on his face was not a 14-year-old's look. It was older than that, harder, the look of someone who had been waiting for confirmation of something he already knew. I looked at Derek. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because it was not what most people would expect. It was not rage. It was not humiliation. What I felt was a particular clarity. The same clarity I had felt 40 years ago standing in front of a warehouse inventory that did not match the ledger, when everything that had seemed complicated resolved itself into something very simple. The numbers were wrong. Someone had made them wrong on purpose. And now I knew exactly what to do. I set my water glass down on the tray table beside me. I uncrossed my legs and placed both feet flat on the floor. And I looked up at Derek Allen Carter, who was standing in my house drinking wine I had indirectly paid for in a room full of people he had assembled to watch me sign away what remained of my savings. "Pretty good, actually," I said. My voice came out level. Not loud, not theatrical, just clear the way. A measurement is clear, the way a column of numbers is clear when every figure has been verified and there is nothing left to dispute. "Why don't you tell me," I said, "how it feels to be homeless right after I take my house back?" The laugh died in the room the way a candle dies when you put your hand over it all at once, completely leaving nothing behind but the smell of something that had been burning. Derek's smile did not fall immediately. It held for 2 full seconds, frozen on his face past the point where it belonged, the way a smile holds when the brain has not yet caught up with what the ears have heard. Then it came apart slowly from the edges inward, and what was underneath it was something I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not embarrassment, but the particular expression of a man who has just discovered that the floor he was standing on was never as solid as he believed. "Oh, Walter!" His voice had changed, register lower now, careful, the sales voice replaced by something that was working hard to sound reasonable. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about—" "There hasn't," I said. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out the envelope. I had carried it for 2 weeks, and it was warm from my body, and my hands were steady when I set it on the table in front of me and opened it. The deed came out first. I held it up briefly so the room could see it. 1 page, my name in the header, the property address below it, the county recorder's stamp in the lower right corner. "This is the deed to this house," I said. "My name, my signature, January 2019. I set it on the table and took out the next document. Transfer confirmations, 2.5 years of them printed and organized by date, the amounts, and Derek's stated reasons in the left margin in my handwriting. "These are the bank transfers I made to Derek's account between August 2019 and October 2021, I said. $87,900. Roof repairs that were never performed. A furnace replacement that never happened. Pipe work that does not exist. Property taxes inflated well beyond the actual county assessment, and the room had gone completely still. Not the polite stillness of people waiting for a speaker to finish, the deeper stillness of people who have understood that what they are witnessing is real." Gary Solis put his drink down on the mantelpiece and took a half step backward. Derek's mouth opened. "Those are family arrangements, Walter. You can't just—" "And this," I said, setting the last page on top of the stack, "is a written account, signed and dated from your neighbor Frank Miller, confirming that the apartment above the garage has been rented to tenants for the past 14 months. The rental income from my property, deposited into your account." Emily stood up from her chair. Her face had gone the color of winter sky, pale still, with something moving fast behind it. "Dad." Her voice came out barely above a breath. "What house? What is all of this?" I looked at my daughter across the table, across the documents, across 6 years of a story that had been built around my silence and my love and my unwillingness to believe the worst of the man she had married. "Sit down, sweetheart," I said as gently as I knew how. "I'll explain everything." Derek took 1 step toward the table. His hand moved toward the documents. "Don't," I said. He stopped. Emily came around the table. Not quickly, with the deliberate, careful movement of someone who is not sure the ground beneath them is solid, but is going to cross it anyway. She reached the stack of documents and stood over them, and I watched her look down at the deed the way you look at something that reorders everything you thought you understood about a room you have lived in for years. She picked it up with both hands. The room held its collective breath. Someone near the bar cart set a glass down too carefully, the click of it too loud in the quiet. Gary Solis had moved to the far edge of the fireplace. His arms crossed his face, doing the calculation of a man deciding how much of this evening he wanted to be associated with. "Walter Hayes," Emily read aloud, her voice barely carrying. "Owner of record." She looked up at Derek. "Your name isn't on here." "Emily." Derek's voice had shifted again, softer now, the register he used when he wanted to manage her rather than perform for a room. "This is more complicated than it looks. Let me explain it properly, not like this, not in front of— Your name isn't on here, Derek." She said it again, not louder, but with a different quality. The quality of a woman who has just understood something and is making sure she has understood it correctly before she moves any further. It has never been on here. She set the deed down and picked up the transfer confirmations. I watched her eyes move down the first page, dates, amounts, stated reasons. Her jaw tightened with each line. By the second page, her hands were trembling, not with weakness, but with the particular physical effort of a person keeping themselves controlled when every instinct is pulling the other direction. Roof repairs, she read. August 2019, $4,200. She looked up. We have the original roof, Derek. I watched the inspector walk it 2 years ago, and he said it was in good condition. The flashing, Derek started. Furnace replacement, November 2019, $3,800. Her voice was rising now, not in volume but in precision, each word placed exactly. The furnace has the original manufacturer's label on it. I have seen that label. I know what year it says. Emily just listened to me for 1 second. Pipe repair, March 2020. She dropped the page on the table and looked at him straight. $2,100. Derek, I was home that day. I was home all day. No plumber came to this house. Derek spread his hands, and his face arranged itself into the expression of a reasonable man being unreasonably accused, the expression he had been practicing. I understood now, since the certified mail arrived at the door. There are things about how I managed the finances that are complicated, and I should have communicated better, I accept that. But what your father is implying here is not, stop. The word came from Noah. Every head turned. Noah had pushed back his chair and was standing at the far end of the table, his soda can still in his hand, his face very young and very certain at the same time. Just stop talking, Dad. Everyone can see what this is. Derek turned to his son. Noah, you don't understand the full picture here. I understand that Grandpa bought Lily's bike, Noah said, and his voice cracked on the last word, but held. I was in the driveway. I saw him bring it. And you told me I was remembering it wrong. You told me that for 2 years. He set the soda can down on the table with a sharp crack. I wasn't remembering it wrong. The room was very still. Emily turned away from her husband and walked to the bedroom hallway. I heard the door open, the particular sound of a drawer pulled fast, and then she was back in, under 2 minutes, her phone in her hand. Her face set with a resolution that reminded me so sharply of Margaret that my chest seized. She held the phone out to the room screen facing out. This is an email from Gary Solis to my husband sent 6 weeks ago. Her voice was steady and terrible. It says, does Emily know the property isn't actually yours? She scrolled with her thumb. And this is Derek's reply. She knows what she needs to know. Gary Solis uncrossed his arms and took a step toward the door. Gary. Derek's voice went sharp. Gary, hold on. I'm going to let you handle this one, Gary said, and he picked his coat off the hook by the entry without breaking stride, and the front door opened and closed behind him, and the cold December air came through the room for just a moment before the seal of warmth closed back over it. Derek turned back to the room. He was still standing at the head of the table, but the head of the table did not belong to him the way it had 20 minutes ago. The room had shifted under him slowly and completely, the way ground shifts after a long rain. And I want everyone to understand, he said, that I have spent 6 years building something for this family. Whatever the paperwork says, whatever Walter's version of events is, I have been the one here. I have been the one managing this house, raising these kids, holding this family together while taking $87,000 from my father, Emily said. The number landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Derek opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Emily looked at him for a long moment, not with hatred, Not with the dramatic fury of someone in a scene, but with the exhausted, clear-eyed look of a woman who has been handed a truth she cannot put back down. "I think," she said, "that you should go wait in the kitchen." Derek went to the kitchen. Not because he wanted to, because 40 people had just watched his wife tell him to, and there was no version of staying in that room that did not make things worse for him. I watched him walk through the kitchen doorway, past the folding chair where I had sat all evening, past the tray table with the glass of water and the paper cocktail napkin, and the door swung shut behind him. The dining room exhaled. For a moment, nobody moved. Then slowly, the way a room reorganizes itself after something has fallen and broken, people began to shift. An older woman I recognized as Emily's aunt from Columbus put her hand on Emily's arm and said something low. Two of Derek's co-workers near the bar cart exchanged a look and began collecting their coats. A cousin of Emily's I had met once at a birthday party caught my eye across the room and nodded once slowly, the nod of someone who has understood something they wish they had understood sooner. Noah came around the table and stood beside me. He did not say anything. He just stood there close enough that his shoulder was almost touching mine, and that was enough. Emily stood at the head of the table with her phone still in her hand, and I watched her do what I had watched Margaret do 100 times across 41 years, pull herself together from the inside out, quietly, completely, without asking anyone for help or permission. She set the phone face down on the table. She straightened the stack of documents. She looked at her aunt and said, "I'm so sorry about this. I think we're going to need to cut the evening short." Her aunt squeezed her arm. "Don't you apologize for 1 second, sweetheart." People began leaving in the measured, careful way of guests, who understand that their presence has become a burden. There were brief hugs for Emily, a few hands on my shoulder, as people passed murmured words I did not fully hear. Lily had appeared from somewhere, the den, I thought, where she had been watching a movie with 2 cousins who were too young to understand what was happening. And she stood in the hallway doorway in her Christmas pajamas, looking at the room with wide, uncertain eyes. "Grandpa," she said, "is the party over?" "I think so, Bug," I said. "Come here." She crossed the room and climbed onto my knee the way she had when she was 4, which she was too big for now, and did anyway. And I held on and looked over her head at Emily, and Emily looked back at me. And what was in her face was something I did not have a word for: grief and relief and anger and love, all compressed into one expression that I knew I would carry for the rest of my life. The room was mostly empty when the kitchen door opened. Derek came back in. He had used the time to collect himself. His face was composed, his posture deliberate, the performance of a man who has decided that what just happened can still be reframed if he chooses his next words carefully enough. He looked at the near-empty room, at the documents still on the table, at Emily standing beside it, at me with Lily on my knee. He looked at me longest. "Walter." His voice was quiet now, stripped of the sales register, stripped of the warmth and the theater. What was underneath was something flatter and harder. "I want to talk about what happens next, practically. For Emily, for the kids." He paused. "You have a legal notice out there with my name on it. I understand that. But I want you to think about what you're actually doing to this family." "I've thought about it for 2 years," I said. "Emily." He turned to his wife. "You know what it would mean? The disruption for Noah, for Lily. Moving, changing schools, the stability they have here." His voice had found a new register. Not the salesman, not the performer, something more stripped down and more dangerous. "This is still our home. Whatever the paperwork says." "The paperwork," Emily said, "says it's my father's home." Derek's jaw tightened. He looked back at me. And then he made the decision I had been waiting for him to make, the one that told me everything remaining that I needed to know about who he was. Fine, he said. Fine, Walter. You want to do it this way? He straightened his shoulders. You walk out that door tonight and pursue this, and I will make sure that every person in this family understands that you manufactured this entire situation, that you set me up, that you have been building this case for months because you want control over Emily's life. His voice was very level. I will make sure your grandchildren hear that version. And you know how stories travel in this family. Lily had gone very still on my knee. I put my hand on her back. Derek, Noah said from beside me. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like something with an edge. Stop talking. Derek looked at his son. Something moved across his face, not regret, but its shadow. I lifted Lily gently from my knee and stood up. I picked up my jacket from the back of the folding chair and put it on. I gathered the documents from the table, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it into my inside pocket. The notice stands, I said. 30 days from delivery. Patricia Okafor's number is on the paperwork if you have questions. I buttoned my jacket. Emily. I looked at my daughter. You know how to reach me. She crossed the room in 4 steps and put her arms around me and held on, and I held back, and she was shaking very slightly, the fine tremor of someone who has been holding something enormous and is only now beginning to put it down. I'll call you tomorrow, she said against my shoulder. I know, I said. I kissed the top of her head. I touched Noah's shoulder as I passed him. I looked at Lily, who was standing in the middle of the room in her Christmas pajamas, and I said, the music box is on my kitchen table, Bug, safe and sound. Her face broke into the brightest thing in that room. I walked to the front door, took my coat from the hook, and stepped outside into the December cold. She called me the next morning at 7:43. I was already up. I had not slept past 5:30 in months. One of the quieter consequences of a year spent lying awake doing arithmetic, and I was at my kitchen table with coffee and the morning light coming in gray and thin through the window over the sink. The music box was where it had been since October lid closed the small dancer frozen mid-turn. I picked up before the second ring. Emily? Dad. Her voice was different from last night. The trembling was gone, replaced by something harder and more deliberate, the voice of a woman who had spent the night deciding something and had finished deciding. I need to tell you what I found. Tell me, I said. After you left, Derek tried to talk to me. He said the documents were out of context. He said the rental income from the garage went back into the house into maintenance costs I didn't know about. He said your transfers were, he called them voluntary contributions, that you offered. She stopped. I didn't argue with him last night. I just said I needed to think and I went to bed. And this morning, I said. This morning I got up at 5 and I went through our bank accounts. Her voice was very steady. Every account. 3 years back. I held my coffee cup with both hands and waited. Dad, I have been transferring money to Derek every month for 2 years and 4 months. She said it the way you say something you have practiced saying so the words don't break you on the way out. He told me it was for you. That you were having trouble, that you were too proud to ask me directly, that he was handling it quietly, so you wouldn't feel embarrassed. A breath. He said you knew about it, that it was an arrangement between the two of you. My chest hurt in the old way, the way that had no medical name. Emily. $14,400, she said. Over 28 months. Every transfer labeled for Dad or Dad expenses or helping Dad. Dad. Her voice fractured on the word, just for a moment, and then she pulled it back. He used your name. He put your name on every single transaction so that if I ever looked, it would look like I was taking care of you. And you never saw a dollar of it. No, I said. I didn't. She was quiet for 3 full seconds, and I could hear her breathing controlled, deliberate, the breathing of someone managing something enormous. Then, I also found the folder, the one with Gary Solis. There are more emails than I showed everyone last night. There's a projected revenue breakdown for the rental conversion. Derek's share, Solis's share. A pause. There's no line for you, Dad. Not 1%. The house would have been the asset, and you would have been the signature. And that would have been the entire extent of your involvement. I know, I said. How long have you known about the full scope of it? I've known pieces since October, I said. The full picture came together over the past few weeks. She made a sound, not a sob. Something more controlled and more painful, the sound of a person absorbing the distance between what they believed and what was true. I should have asked you directly. Years ago, when he first told me you were struggling, I should have picked up the phone and asked you myself. Her voice hardened. I didn't, because part of me didn't want to. If you were struggling, it meant something was wrong, and if something was wrong, I would have to look at it. And I had 2 kids and a mortgage and a job, and it was easier to just let Derek handle it. A long exhale. That's on me, Dad. That part is mine. Emily. No. Firm, clear. I'm not looking for you to tell me it's okay. I'm telling you so you know I understand it. All of it. A beat. I asked Derek to leave this morning. My hand tightened around the coffee cup. How did he take it? He argued for 40 minutes, she said. He said I was overreacting. He said everything he did was for this family. He said you had manipulated the situation to drive a wedge between us. Her voice was flat and certain. Then he packed a bag and went to stay with his brother in Dayton. Are you and the kids all right? We're all right. I heard her exhale, long and unsteady, like a breath held since the night before, finally being released. Noah made breakfast this morning. He made pancakes. He didn't say much, he made pancakes for all of us, and he set the table, and Lily ate 4 of them and told him they were the best she'd ever had. A sound that was half laugh, half something that cracked through it. He's a good kid, Dad. He is, I said. He's very much like his mother. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what happens next? Practically. The notice is running, I said. Derek has until mid-January to be fully out. After that, I'll decide what to do with the house. I'm not making any decisions about it until you and the kids are settled. You don't have to protect us, Dad. We'll figure it out. I know you will, I said. I'm not protecting you. I'm just not in a hurry. Another pause, softer than the others. Dad, the music box. Can I come get it this week? My eyes stung. I pressed the back of my wrist against them and looked out the window at the gray December morning, at the parking lot with its thin coat of overnight frost, at the cardinal sitting on the maple branch, the same way it had sat there in November, red as something that refused to be missed. Come whenever you want, I said. I'll make coffee. Okay. Her voice was quieter now, the hardness settling into something more tired and more real. Dad, thank you for being patient enough to do this right. Your mother taught me that, I said. Most of the things worth knowing she taught me. Emily was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. Then, I know. I remember. I sat at the kitchen table after we hung up with my coffee gone cold and the music box in front of me and the December light doing what December light does in Ohio, gray and honest and without apology. I opened the music box lid. The Brahms lullaby began small and clear and exactly what it had always been. I let it play all the way through. Derek was out of the house by January 14th. I know the exact date because Patricia Okafor called me that afternoon to confirm the property had been vacated and the keys left on the kitchen counter, which was the arrangement her office had worked out with Derek's attorney over the preceding 3 weeks. No dramatic exit, no final confrontation. Just keys on a counter and a door that closed for the last time on a Tuesday afternoon while Emily was at work and the kids were at school and nobody had to witness it. That was, I thought, the least he had ever given any of us. A quiet ending he had not chosen but could not avoid. Emily filed for divorce in February. Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, which meant the dissolution could proceed without either party establishing wrongdoing in court, a fact that frustrated her initially until Patricia explained that the financial misconduct was addressable through the asset division process instead. Derek's attorney negotiated. Patricia negotiated back. By April, there was a settlement. Derek received nothing from the property, acknowledged the debt of $87,900 in writing, and agreed to a repayment structure tied to his income that Patricia described as optimistic but enforceable. I did not expect to see most of that money. I had made my peace with that in December, sitting at my kitchen table with the Brahms lullaby playing and the Ohio winter pressing against the windows. Some debts get paid in full, and some get paid in the currency of acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, I had decided, was enough. I listed the house in May. It sold in 11 days to a young couple, a teacher and a physical therapist, Emily told me, with a baby coming in September. The kind of people who would fill a house with exactly what a house was built for. I signed the closing documents on a Thursday morning in a title company office with bad coffee and a pen chained to the desk, which made me smile in a way I did not fully explain to the notary. From the proceeds, I set aside enough to help Emily with a down payment on a smaller place, a 3-bedroom ranch on Clement Street, close to the kids' schools, with a yard that caught the afternoon light in a way she said reminded her of the Glendale house where she grew up. She argued with me about the money for 20 minutes on the phone, and then accepted it, which was exactly the right amount of arguing. I kept the rest, enough to live on properly for the first time in 6 years. Enough to replace the Impala, which I did in June. Nothing extravagant, a sensible sedan with fewer than 30,000 miles, and a heater that worked without negotiation. Enough finally for the trip. I left in September. Margaret's notebook was on the passenger seat. The small one she had kept in the nightstand, the list of places she had wanted to go. Bar Harbor, the Vermont fall foliage, Quebec City in the early autumn before the tourist season fully ended. She had written each destination in her careful, particular handwriting, and underneath some of them she had written small notes to herself, good lobster apparently, and bring layers, and Walter will complain about the driving, but he'll love it when we get there. She was right about all 3. I drove through Bar Harbor on a Tuesday in late September when the air smelled like salt, and the harbor light was doing something I did not have adequate language for. I ate lobster at a place with paper tablecloths and no reservations required, and I took a photograph of the harbor and sent it to Emily, and she sent back 3 words. She'd have loved this. I know I wrote back. Vermont was exactly what Margaret had promised it would be. The hills gone red and orange and yellow in a way that felt almost unreasonable, almost too much, the kind of beauty that makes you feel slightly accused by it, as though the world is asking whether you have been paying sufficient attention. I had not for a long time. I was paying attention now. I was back in Millbrook by mid-October. Emily had settled into the Clement Street house by then, and on Sunday afternoons I drove over and we sat in her kitchen, which had good light, and drank coffee and talked about ordinary things. Noah had joined the school debate team, which struck me as exactly right for a young man who had spent years watching adults say one thing and mean another and had decided to learn the formal rules of argument as a form of self-defense. Lily had claimed the largest bedroom painted one wall yellow without asking permission and informed Emily that it was an artistic decision and therefore non-negotiable. She was Margaret's granddaughter down to the bone. December came, and with it the question of Christmas. Emily raised it on a Sunday in early December, carefully, the way she raised things she was not sure of. "Would you want to come to us this year?" she said. "Just us. Small. I'll cook." "I'll bring the rolls," I said. She laughed, a real one, unguarded, the laugh she had inherited from her mother. "Dad, you always bring the rolls." "And they are always," I said, "the best thing on the table." She laughed again, and I held the sound of it for a moment before I let it go. Christmas was small and warm and unremarkable in all the ways that matter most. Emily cooked a roast that was better than she gave herself credit for. Noah set the table without being asked and put the music box in the center of it, between the candles wound and ready. Lily wore a paper crown she had made herself and lost twice during dinner, and found both times under her chair. After dessert, when the dishes were stacked and the kids had retreated to the living room, Emily and I sat at her kitchen table with our coffee and the quiet that comes after a meal eaten without any particular agenda. "Dad," she said, "are you okay?" "Actually, okay." I thought about that for a moment, genuinely the way the question deserved. Outside the kitchen window, the December night was clear and cold, and the light from the house fell across the snow in the yard in a way that made the ordinary yard look like something worth keeping. "Yes," I said. And I meant it without reservation for the first time in a long time. Emily reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and we sat like that for a while, not talking, just present the music box between the candles on the table behind us. The Brahms lullaby wound, and waiting the night outside, doing what December nights do when you are finally warm enough to appreciate them. That is my story. A father, a house, and 6 years of silence that cost more than money. If this grandpa's story taught me anything, it is this: love is not a debt, and family is not a ledger. I spent 6 years paying for a place at the table I already deserved, simply by being their father. Don't be like me. If something feels wrong, ask the question out loud, even when the answer frightens you. Silence is not kindness. Silence is just a longer way of arriving at the same pain. I believe God puts the truth in front of us long before we are ready to read it. I simply waited too long to open my eyes. This is my personal opinion, and I will stand by it. A man who steals from his own family is not providing for them. He is consuming them. If this family story moved something in, you leave a comment below and tell me what you took from it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if grandpa stories like this one speak to you, subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because the next family story is already waiting. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. The stories that follow contain fictional elements crafted for the purpose of reflection and inspiration. If that is not what you are looking for today, I understand. Choose what serves you best.